There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to see you all here and everyone who's watching the recording later. I'm really excited about the session that we're going to present now. We're going to talk about each of the groups in the manage stage. Each PM will present a short presentation of their roadmap. I added in the chat a link to the meeting notes where you can add questions and answers. The plan is for each PM to present about 15 minutes of a presentation and then followed by a 3-minute Q&A session. So feel free to write down your questions during the presentations and we'll leave some time at the end to address those questions. Whatever we will not get to, we'll answer asynchronously. So without further ado, I'm going to start. Our presentation order is I will be presenting Workspace and then Hannah will present authentication and authorization. Sam will go for compliance and planning for optimize, and I will conclude this with import. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the Workspace team, as I mentioned. And for anyone watching this recording and who's on here, if this is all discussions about our roadmap and this is best case scenarios, please do not use this for purchasing considerations and decisions. So in terms of where we are in the DevOps toolchain, Manage kind of overlooks everything in the DevOps lifecycle. And you'll see this slide pretty much in every single one of our presentations today. The Manage stage handles everything that you need to manage your GitLab workspace, which is everything, your projects, your groups, and so on, starting with importing your data from competitor tools or from another GitLab instance or a SaaS offering, and allow you to quickly join GitLab with the right level of access while adhering to compliance regulations and procedures, and ultimately allowing you to fully implement your DevOps processes and be able to monitor your DevOps adoption and manage your value stream. So that kind of combines our stage goals and what we're here for. If you want to reach anyone from the Manage stage, here are all our Slack channels below, starting from the stage channel and going into the group ones, and you can read more about it in our handbook. So the objective of the Workspace team and group is focusing on creating a better experience for organizations to manage their GitLab experience. And as I mentioned, this is really everything. It includes moving administrative capabilities that previously existed only for self-managed users to our SaaS offering as well, like management of users and groups and supporting cascading settings and permissions and so on. And it also introduces a new concept for us for feature parity between projects, subgroups, and groups. And it creates a more intuitive user experience for all our users, which expects common behaviors throughout the product. Every one of you on the call and was listening probably at one point in time expected some kind of feature on a project or group level and found that there wasn't the same behavior when they were looking at the other level. So this team is really focused on creating that really nice user experience. It's about creating a more efficient process for us internally as GitLab, for our GitLab development, for parity, and for accessibility. It's also a really good time to remind ourselves that when we are developing features, we should probably refrain from creating instance level features which are only available for our self-managed users and not for all our users. And what we gain here is we don't have any more duplication. Features are released once, and we can remove the duplications in the code for those that we developed both for the group level and for the project level. We can create a consistent experience between SaaS and self-managed users, and also the user's experience between groups and instances, projects. And in terms of accessibility, today we have several features that are only available for administrators, and only admins can take action and view those features. And it's a shame that we can't have more users using that. For example, DevOps score is something that only the administrator can look at, and maybe it actually interests more the executive level or a group team leader or something else, and they just have no access to this. So there's a lot of different goals for why we created this group and why we want to create this parity. In terms of the categories that the group is responsible for, we have subgroups, projects, and users. And let's discuss what we plan to work on this year. So we have lots of plans in terms of what we want to accomplish in Workspace. Our main goals for this year, the near-term goals, are established as a core construct to enable features to migrate easily between groups and projects, and lay down the foundation for other teams, not only the Workspace team, to migrate their features over to this concept. And in addition, we're also moving administrative features from the admin panel that were previously only accessible for administrators on self-managed users to the group owner level. So this will also be available on SaaS. In terms of midterm goals or further goals that the team is currently working on, we have consolidating and cascading settings, which will allow enforcement of settings top down. So you can set something at a top level and that will automatically trickle down to anything beneath it in the hierarchy. And we want to implement a new top level namespace, which will be the Workspace, the team's name, which will be similar to our existing instance level and self-managed. It's going to be still that top level group, showing you an entry point for an organization to see all their data grouped in one place, and where they can get an understanding of what's going on in their organization. So they can easily take action on groups, projects, users, settings, and so on. So the way that we built out our goals and how we're going to accomplish it is we broke this down into different phases. Our first phase is complete, I'm happy to report, which was to create a new concept for projects, which we call project namespace. So it introduces that concept. We also completed backfilling all the existing projects, almost all the existing projects, to this new concept of project namespace. And now we're in phase 2, which is replacing core usages of project with project namespace. And I'll talk about that a little bit further down. Phase 3 is the one that I'm most excited about. We need to complete phase 2 before that, but it's the ability to migrate functionality to the new namespace concept, which will allow every single group in GitLab to start migrating their features over to this new level. And that means that once you develop something, it's supported already for the project and group level. And then we have a cleanup. In parallel, we're working on administrative features that we're moving, as I mentioned, from that instance level, admin panel, to the group owner level, so that we can use this in SaaS. Next, we want to create that top level namespace experience, can consolidate and cascade settings, which we might get to this year, but I think it's a stretch goal, and permissions. So what's next? In terms of what the team is currently working on and what we probably will be working on in the next few milestones, as I mentioned, we're working on phase 2. Phase 2 replaces core usage of project with project namespace. So after we created that phase 1 of project namespace, this is under the hood work to make it so that the new project workflows work with this new construct. And what we have for the MVC is creating membership and routing for this new namespace architecture. And then outside of it and in parallel, we'll work on policies and querying. If you want to read more, the epic is linked below. And as I mentioned, we're moving administrative functionality to the Workspace. So one of our biggest pain points that we have today for SaaS users is that they don't have any control over their members in their groups and projects and so on. And if they want to do something on a user and take action on a user, for example, block or ban a user, what they actually have to do is open a support ticket and ask someone from the GitLab team, a GitLab administrator, to do that for them. And this is really time consuming for them. They wait for days and it's inefficient. There really isn't a good reason why they can't do this themselves. So what we're doing in this effort is moving administrative functionality to the group and project owners so they can control groups and projects. Some missing functionalities that we have today is user cap, block auto-created users, deactivate users, ban users, and so on. And what we plan to do here in this epic is iterate on moving over a few of the following settings to the namespace, like the ability to list users that are inactive and active, the ability to add users if they're provisioned, remove users, block, unblock, change the max role, change expiration date, change sort and filter, and so on. In terms of planned validation efforts that we are planning to kind of fix or work on a right terminology for Workspace. Every time that we discuss Workspace internally, it seems to be a source of confusion, and even more so when we're talking to our customers. So the terminology is really associated to our backend architecture, and we feel it's not really customer facing. So what we want to do is we want to create a really good naming convention for organizational constructs and how they relate to each other, and how we're going to communicate these changes both internally and to our external users so that they can relate to what we're working on and understand it better. In terms of cross group and stage work, this is really exciting for me because all of you have an opportunity here to collaborate with the Workspace team. We would integrate with each and every one of the teams within GitLab. And once we get to phase 3, which is migrating the functionality over to the namespaces, it will allow anyone to migrate their features from a project or group level to the missing level in the hierarchy and create parity between groups and projects, which is one of the reasons we have lower SUS scores today in terms of our user pain points. They expect something else than they get when they work between projects and groups. In terms of community contributions, we actually had quite a few exciting contributions in the last few months. We had adding an API endpoint for delete topics. So in the past, you could create project topics, but there was no way for you to delete them. And so you could have all these weird deprecated names and things like that. And now you can actually delete it. We added a configuration for admins to disable personalization questions. These are questions that are asked when you create a new group in the product. We added a topics API, which allow better management of these project topics. We added that to the admin area as well, where you can see and manage those project topics. And now ongoing is allowing to unfollow someone in the user pop-up. So when you look at someone who, for example, commented on something and you just have their overlay, you can just unfollow or follow them through that, or realize whether or not you are following or unfollowing that user. So some really exciting stuff. And that was a really quick overview of Workspace. And I'll go to the Q&A section now.
Right,
I'm going to, yeah.
I have a couple questions that are in there.
Go ahead.
Okay. So you mentioned cascading settings and permissions. I understand how inheritance works for groups and projects. Can you give a little overview of what exactly cascading settings and permissions means? Is it different from the inheritance model? And will it be changing at all with Workspace?
In general, it's too early to tell, but probably things will change. What I want to quickly show is a mockup that Daniel created for cascading settings that I'm not sure this is going to be the final design, but it kind of gives you an understanding of what is planned. So if you look at permissions today, we're thinking about adding this enforce globally option where you can mark whether or not this is going to cascade down to all the things beneath you. So for example, if you allow users to request access, this will be done for every single group and project beneath wherever you are. And if you don't enforce it globally, then this can be overridden. So I hope that answers the question. In terms of permissions, I think things will change. I'll give you an example. Yesterday in Slack, we had this whole conversation about we're consolidating groups and projects, and in groups there's a group owner, and in projects there really isn't one. And now when you invite people to the group, you can actually give a higher permission than you can. So this requires some thinking about things that we didn't have in the past and how we can consolidate them. So I'm sure things will change. It's too early to tell what.
Okay. That was helpful. Thank you.
Do you want to voice over your next question, Hannah?
Yep. So you were mentioning one of the benefits of Workspace is that our developers will no longer need to duplicate code. But for all the things that are already duplicated, should we be thinking about possibly tech debt items to go back and clean up that duplicated code, or is that something that's going to come automatically somehow?
Great question. So we should be thinking about it, but in terms of priority, and this is priority that we listed with Sid, is that first of all, we need to add the missing items. So let's add missing items that customer are already requesting to the group level. Then we can add missing items in general. And then lastly, we can do a cleanup and remove the duplicated code.
Okay.
I think I'm next.
Yeah.
I would like to ask about this one of the stretch goal, which is permissions. What did you mean by that?
So I think we already started the discussion already yesterday with group and project permissioning. I think this is a really large topic. It's too early days. I'm sure that we're going to have to figure this out on a workspace level because many organizations want to set permissions at that top level group and have that cascade down to everything. And so we need to figure out how we do that. What is different than what we have today? We already noticed that there's some differences between permissions in group and project level. So we need to figure out what makes sense to consolidate, what makes sense to leave separate. And so again, early days as this is a stretch goal, but it's definitely something that we will need to handle as part of this project.
Thanks for this answer. And my next is not actually a question, but a statement, rather, is about terminology. I believe that one terminology that is used both internally and externally, so what we call things between ourselves, what we call things when we talk to customers, it's best and usually very best and most clear when it's the same. So if we consolidate this, if you work on this consolidation, I believe it's worth that doing it sooner rather than later to make sure that we have similar concepts both in communication with customers and in the code.
Yes, I agree. Hopefully we have a new PM joining in May and we can get this validation work started. I will say that today we use the concept namespace between us internally, and that cannot be user facing. It's really a very technical term. So that's going to change for sure. What will it be called? No idea. That's going to be the validation, but thanks for calling that out. So it looks like I'm done with my questions, and now I'll pass it on to Hannah.
Okay. All right, let me get out of full screen here. All right, Here's our lovely disclaimer that I already went over. So I'm Hannah Suter. I'm the product manager for authentication and authorization. I've shortened our name whenever I talk to auth. It's just a mouthful otherwise, so you'll probably hear me refer to that. And we are, again, part of the manage stage. And now let me dive into what auth is. Our objective as a team is to enable GitLab administrators to strike their desired balance between security and accessibility for their users. So everything we do, it serves both the admin and the end user, of course, but it kind of serves the end user through the admin. So I wanted to write our objective statement from the system administrator perspective. We're currently working on splitting out our categories, so this isn't fully approved yet, but we have user management, system access, permissions, and then we're going to be taking credential management from compliance as soon as that's approved. I was trying to think how I can describe what our team does, and I was trying to get creative, and this may need some revision, but this is my first take at offering a metaphor for what the auth team does. So let's imagine GitLab is one of these ancient things of the past that no one goes to anymore, but is a multi-tenant office building, right? So we have this building with a lot of different offices in it, different companies. So what the auth team provides in this metaphor is we provide the building structure itself, right? We're kind of that structure. We decide the building is safe. It's made from a certain material. It's this certain shape. We own the keys to the offices inside the building. We provide the security guard at the front desk. We provide regular maintenance for the building itself. And we also manage the leases of all of the offices inside the building. Now, our individual tenants, what do they do? They're responsible for extra precautions for their specific office. So maybe you can't get into their office unless you have a badge or you scan your fingerprint. They're responsible for their regular maintenance. So they have their nightly cleaning crew that comes in. They have their own policies on how long visitors can stay inside their office. Maybe they can just come for a day. Maybe they're just there for a meeting and then they're kicked out. And then they can also provide a different level of access based on how trusted someone is. So we don't know about their visitors, but they know about who's supposed to be visiting their office. They can decide, do we need to sign in at the front desk? If I have my badge, maybe I bypass the front desk. And so when thinking about what this means for what we currently offer, I think there's kind of two tenets to what the auth team provides. We give a basic level of security for who has access to the building and how secure it is from an overall perspective. And then we give a toolkit for those office managers to use when deciding how to control access to their individual offices. So they can make it as secure or as accessible or a balance between the two as they want using the tools that we provide. So on the left here is sort of terms within auth that represent our basic security level of our office building. And then to the right is our toolkit, or things that we give our office administrator the ability to either make things more secure, more accessible, and flexible, depending on what we offer. So let me go into our roadmap and what we plan to work on this year. Currently under development within the next few milestones, we're going to be releasing SAML group sync for self-managed instances. This currently exists on SaaS, actually. And so we're bringing parity to our self-managed customers here. We have this concept, which I'll dive into more on the next slide, of enterprise users. As more and more large companies sign on with GitLab, they have a slightly different set of needs, and they really want more control over their users. The way we get there is by providing them an ability to verify their domain. So, anybody with a @company.com email address belongs to me is kind of what they want. So this MVC is our first step to get there. Probably our biggest initiative is customizable roles and permissions. And I'm hoping we can get done with our MVC within the next few milestones for that. And things that are in our planning are actually a lot of just building on what's under active development. We have a couple MVCs coming up, so starting those iterative changes, building on top. For customizable roles, we would be allowing our admins to create a new role. Service accounts, which is kind of a consolidation behind the scenes of group access tokens, project access tokens, and personal access tokens, and rolling those up in a way for our users to be able to have more of an integration user and not have to consume a license seat when using our API. We're going to be putting some effort towards working on what the platform Workspace is building out, and we're going to bring some of our administrator controls over to in order to get parity for our administrators that are on SaaS. We have kind of a split out list of what Workspace is bringing over, and then Auth will be responsible for migrating some of those administrator features as well. Once we have our administrators able to claim those users under their domain, like I said, the main thing they want is more control over them. So we have an epic with a whole bunch of controls that administrators want put into place on what people can do within their office or ecosystem. Things that are a little further out, we know what we need to do for credentials inventory, and that needs to be brought over for self-managed, has a lot of utilities around allowing admins to manage their users' credentials. We're going to bring that to SaaS. For customizable roles, you can imagine as we add to the product and we add new features, things that need permissions, we can't have the Auth team being the bottleneck in having to add and configure every permission and making it available to be customizable. So we need to build out a framework that allows each individual team to submit their permissions, and we would just consume those and display them to the admins. And then part of a large customer demand is bringing group SCIM to the instance level, and that's a little further out for us as well. All right, for customizable roles and permissions, currently in GitLab, we have 6 out-of-the-box roles. These are not flexible, so the definition of developer just is what it is. There's no changing that. So oftentimes our customers have to give their users roles that are either too permissive or too restrictive. And either way, if they have to grant too permissive of roles, it comes up and gets flagged in their audits. Or if they need to give them less permissions, then they have to put in a support ticket, get their users some temporarily elevated permissions, and then have to remember to move them back down to a more limited permission set, creating a lot of overhead. So what we want to do is have our admins be able to define custom roles and permissions. And initially, it's going to be based off of this table. So think of it as I'm going to create a new role, whatever I want to name it. It's going to have a template of, and then I can choose which of these roles I kind of want to base it on. And then I'm going to be able to maybe uncheck any of these topics from the matrix. There are probably going to be some of these things that don't make sense to allow them to be configurable. And it's going to be disabled for some of them, but just the overall concept is think of these as actual live checkboxes where you can check and uncheck. We are keeping these roles and they're not going to change. So you're not going to be able to modify what a developer is, but you will be able to add a new role, let's say called company XYZ developer, and then make it customized. This is going to be an ultimate feature. I just presented the opportunity canvas for this last week, which you're welcome to look at. And then here's the epic with all of the work we need to do broken down in the requirements. All right, our other sort of large problem we're solving for this year is our enterprise customers. So yes, enterprises usually provision their users via SAML or SCIM, but sometimes their users go outside of the process and end up signing up for a GitLab account with a @xyz.com email address. So we have this user floating around. We don't know that that user is floating around in GitLab, but they belong to my domain. So I want to maintain control of them. And then let's say they shouldn't be able to create new projects, or they shouldn't be able to delete projects. How do I get more control over my enterprise users? What we are going to do is allow companies to verify their domain or domains, because a lot of our companies have more than one domain, and to scoop up sort of any user matching that domain once the domain's verified. The user will then get some kind of notification that says, hey, your account now belongs to your enterprise, move any personal projects that you may have under your personal account, something like that. And then once these accounts are enterprise accounts, our admins will be able to have a lot more control over them. Right now, we're still at that domain verification stage. I think there's a quick win we can do in terms of a manual process around verifying a domain and then marking them as enterprise users behind the scenes. But from a technical perspective, that hasn't been validated yet. Our research really has been really robust around roles and permissions. We had a dedicated design pod where we had a cross-functional UX team from, I think, 3 or 4 different groups. We've all been working together to really get some momentum behind this. Initially, we met with over a dozen customers just to understand their problem and kind of get a sense for what we need to build here. We're currently in the validation phase, revisiting a lot of the same customers to show them what we have because they're excited about seeing their input come to life. And then also some new customers who popped up recently wanting to understand where we are with RBAC. And we've been going over the designs, getting feedback and moving forward there. All right, we have community contributions. This one's interesting. This is under development. What this is allowing an administrator, so this for now will be available self-managed only since we are talking about administrators, to be able to define a password policy. So they'll be able to set a minimum character length for the password, whether it requires numbers, symbols, uppercase. A lot of websites have this now. And we are getting this as a community contribution, which is really nice. Also, we've gotten some good community contributions. One of our biggest ones ever was group access tokens in 14.7. And then in 14.9, we got a nice one that kind of provides a little bit more security around whenever a new PAT or a new email address is placed on an account, that user automatically gets an email notification. And then we've sort of flushed out, well, our community contribution helped us flush out our APIs more for keys and tokens. And I'd be glad to take any questions.
Great. I have the first question, Hannah. You talked about enterprise users and domain verification. Is there a difference between an enterprise user and a regular user, or is the main difference in provisioning?
So as it stands today, we technically do have enterprise users, and that's any user that's provisioned. They have that flag behind the scenes. And I think what is really going to be the difference is, so in the future, enterprise users will not only be provisioned, but they will be anyone who has been claimed during that claim process, whenever they match the domain. And what that's going to do is give any admin or group owner that has enterprise users the ability to enforce certain policies or limitations on those users.
Great. Any more questions? If not, we'll move over to Sam.
All right, thanks, Hannah. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see that? Should have the disclaimer slide showing. All right, perfect. Yeah, so anyone watching the recording, this is our same disclaimer slide. We'll be talking about forward, future-looking statements that are all subject to change. Please don't rely on these for purchase decisions. So, hey folks, I'm Sam. I'm the product manager for compliance, and we're going to be talking about a few different things today. We only have 15 minutes, so I did cut some things that would have been good to include, but really I want to spend our time today talking about sort of the philosophical perspective for how we view compliance at GitLab to inform some of the decisions we make, briefly talk through some of our existing feature set to relate it back to that sort of philosophical viewpoint, how customers use the product today. And then we're going to spend most of our time looking at roadmap projects that we're going to be working on here in the next 6 to 12 months, as well as kind of connecting the dots between what we've been hearing from customers and talking about some of the validation efforts that we plan to do in the future as well. And so we've seen this slide in each of the previous presentations, but the one thing I want to kind of give you as food for thought from a compliance perspective is manage and compliance really does cover every single one of our users. It covers every single one of the actions they could potentially take. This represents a huge opportunity for us to make a difference in our users' experience. And we have to make sure that's a good impact and that compliance doesn't become the bottleneck. And to that end, the objective we really have for compliance at GitLab is to make our experience something that's built in to the product rather than bolted onto the product. Traditionally, compliance has been a separate tool or a Word document that you have to fill out as part of every release, or every time you commit code, you have to do some other artifact that's not in the workflow you normally use. And this causes friction, causes frustration. We feel that if we're able to build a built-in experience, this is actually going to be something that helps organizations move faster as a result of the compliance policies and postures they're taking. We're going to be doing this through 3 main categories that our group has responsibility for of audit events, audit reports, and compliance management. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about how we feel that we can help organizations move faster as a result of the compliance. I mentioned that traditionally compliance has been in separate tools, separate workflows. This makes it hard to do the right thing from a compliance perspective. By focusing on how we can integrate compliance controls and compliance workflows where developers are already working, places like the merge requests, places like their pipelines. If we make it easy to do the right thing, people are going to do that. And that's really going to help those interactions between developer teams and compliance teams be more collaborative. How do we get this done efficiently rather than adding additional friction to getting new products out, getting new releases out? Additionally, doing this in a built-in sort of way, this is going to really give those compliance teams the confidence to sleep well at night. They're going to be able to focus their time on, did I define the right policies for my organization, rather than, is my organization following the policies that I already defined? Because everything's going to be built into those existing workflows, they can focus their time on what those workflows are rather than, did people use these external tools? And so to talk a little bit more about our categories, we really view compliance management as, how do we define policies? How do we manage? How do we enforce those policies that compliance teams care about? Audit events are, how do we give compliance teams traceability into what is happening inside of GitLab so that they can go back during an audit or during some sort of retrospective or remediative effort to figure out what happened, when did it happen, who was involved. And also audit reports, because we know that audit events create a lot of data. People want to get to insights of that data. They don't want to spend all their time sifting through it. And so those are really the 3 categories we're focused on and how they fit together. We do have a lot of features that are specifically related to compliance. I'm not going to read this page to you, but I would encourage you to look through it asynchronously as well as in the product documentation. But really what I want to get across to everyone here is, we have a large variety of different controls, a lot of different ways to give our customers the information that they're interested in, that they care about. And this is really the goal, to give them what they need to meet them where they need, so that whatever sort of workflows they want to define for their organization, they have the power to do that. So now let's talk a little bit more about the roadmap, what's to come. I'm not going to go through everything in this roadmap. Again, I would encourage you to review this asynchronously. All of these have links to either the issues or respective epics. But what we're going to be focusing on in the near term is really our compliance report. And we'll look at some pictures of that here in a second. As we look a little bit further out into the future, we're going to shift gears to audit events, adding new audit events, and enhancing our streaming audit event system. And even further out, we have plans to allow further customization of that compliance report, integrate any feedback we receive in the future, as well as continue focusing on adding more audit events. And I mentioned audit events, I don't know how many times so far, but really this is one of the key things that is critical for the success of the audit events category. Customers rely on, I need to be able to see everything going on inside of GitLab. Since we release monthly, we have to commit to adding new audit events to keep pace with all of the new feature development that's going on inside of GitLab. We've had positive customer feedback that they've seen, a difference in us adding all of these new events, that they're happy with that pace. And we've also made it easier for other groups to contribute their own audit events with our audit event development guide. If you've not seen that, I would encourage you to check it out. We'd love to have others contribute audit events to help us keep up with the pace of new features. So one of the major initiatives we're going to be focusing on in the next year, and we have some releases coming out in the pretty immediate future, is overhauling our compliance report. So the compliance report today, it will show you the latest merge request in any of the projects inside of a group that have what's called a merge request violation. This is typically something related to separation of duties. Sam wrote the merge request and then I self-approved it. You normally shouldn't be able to do that. What we're going to be doing with this overhaul, though, is rather than just showing the latest merge request, we're going to show all individual violations that have occurred inside of any project. And this is really going to make a big difference, because then people can see over a historical time frame, what were all the violations that occurred in my release that happened 7 months ago, and how do I make sure all of them had an action plan associated with it. So our MVC of this overhaul is going to be coming soon. And some of the follow-on efforts we see there are a lot of UI, UX changes to refine those workflows, additional filtering to help people get to the nuggets of information they care about, as well as customization so that organizations that don't care about one of our default checks can turn that off, or if they do care about a check that we don't have, they can turn that on. Streaming audit events is another area we're going to be spending a lot of our time on. We released this feature relatively recently. We've already got really good feedback about it. Today, users can send audit events to an HTTP destination of their choosing, which is great. But where this leaves them is they then have to figure out how to ingest, process, and either filter or build their own automation around it. Really, what we want to be able to do is meet them with the storage systems they're already using today. And this would be done in a way such that maybe you have an Amazon S3 bucket and we just directly dump the data there, and the existing SIEM or other tools that already know how to look at S3 can pick that data up automatically. Another piece of feedback that we've heard and that we really want to address is adding filtering of streamed audit events. And that's the picture of, that picture in the bottom right of the slide is kind of a concept of what that might look like. Because right now, streaming audit events sends you everything that is being done in your group. But if you're only trying to drive automation based on when new users are created, you don't necessarily need everything. So we want to be able to offer a way to filter down to just the events that you care about, so you don't overwhelm your own endpoints with data that you don't necessarily care about. This is in really early stages. We're going to be doing a lot more validation work, doing mockups, prototypes before this comes to the product. And I'm really excited for this one. External status checks is another area we're going to be focusing on in the year to come. So today, we know that a lot of our customers have those external tools, external workflows we talked about at the beginning. While our opinion is that they all should be in GitLab, we know that customers aren't going to be there immediately. So having this concept of external status checks allows the merge request to call out to those tools, provide some metadata, let that tool make its analysis that says, yes, this merge request is good to go, or no, it's not. And customers can use this today to get a thumbs up or a waiting status, but we're going to be adding a no, this merge request is not ready to be merged status, and we're going to add enforcement around that as well. So those are some of the high level roadmap things that we're focused on. I wanted to also talk about some of our research and validation efforts. And one of those is going to be around our category maturity and advancing those. We've had these categories in compliance for a few years at this point, and we've talked to a lot of different customers how they're using them to solve real world business problems. So what we're going to be doing is doing our category maturity scorecard effort to advance those maturities to viable for compliance management. And I'm really excited to get the results of that testing. Hopefully it's all good and we can move it forward, but I'm also assuming we're going to get some points of feedback that we can address and use to continually make our product better. Final piece of validation effort we're going to start taking on the next year is looking at what's called supply chain levels for software artifacts, or SALSA. And this really fits in with the broader GitLab story around our focus on software supply chain security. Because we know today that software is composed from many, many different parts. If a vulnerability or some piece of malicious code is in one of them, it can potentially foul an entire application. This is going to be a large cross-stage initiative. So we'll work with our own group, competition analysis, container security, I'm sure some others, to figure out how we can come up with a good solution for our customers so that when they ship a release, they can say, this is what's in this release, this is the only thing that's in this release, and it's all compliant and secure. That said, I don't think only SALSA is the way we should look at this. So I want us to investigate, are there more generic ways that we could build out these sort of checks and examination patterns in a way that we could use to implement SALSA, but also do additional customization on top of it for new standards that emerge in the years to come. And with that, thank you for your time. Happy to take your questions either now or asynchronously. Hannah, it looks like you've got the first one. Do you want to vocalize?
Yep. Sure. So I'm excited about your developer guide for submitting audit events, and I need to look at that. But aside from the how we submit our audit events, do you have any general guidelines for what should be audited? Like, do we need to be thinking what's too much information versus what's valuable, or is it just kind of like as much as possible is great? What are some general principles here?
Yeah, so that's a great question, one we wrestled with about a year or so ago. So there's actually a section in the handbook I can add to the doc later, but it talks about how we think about what are our most critical sort of audit events. Really are events that actions that do things that are irreversible, such as data deletion, are things that we want to really critically audit. Beyond that, things like adding, removing users, changing their permissions, because that could unlock the doors to everything. Those are things we want to audit. And really, we have that sort of list of these are the things we think are really important. Your question about data volume is an interesting one, and that's actually why we developed streaming audit events, because we knew that there were lots of things that users care about, things like monitoring how often do our users log in, what is the number of times this Git repository gets pulled every day, that are important to them, but would generate so much data that we couldn't reasonably store it in the GitLab database. And so we do have that mechanism of streaming events. Therefore, if we have actions that we don't consider critical enough to store in our database, or they might generate so much data we'd have problems, we can use that system to stream those audit events as they occur.
Okay. Does your developer guide go over how to contribute events to both?
It does, yeah. We
Okay.
also have links to a few example merge requests to give you a starting point.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks for the question. Thank you,
Great.
Dennis, for linking it. Yeah.
I have the next one. Are there, and if so, what are the main differences between the features available today for self-managed versus SaaS users?
Yeah, great question. So there are a few differences in our features. During Hannah's presentation, we talked about credential inventory a little bit. That is currently only available at the self-managed instance level rather than group level, which means none of our SaaS users can use it. We have some epics and some issues about bringing that down to the group level for .com users. Trying to think of other features. Really, we've tried to keep that SaaS first mentality front of mind. So when we develop new features like compliance frameworks, we've always tried to start that at the group level. Same thing with streaming audit events. That's currently available at the group level rather than the instance level. So off the top of my head, our main feature would just be the credential inventory.
Great. Do you have any insights into common violations that you've seen on customer calls or so on?
Yeah, the probably the main concern I've heard on customer calls is that developers are just trying to get something in at the last minute. They just want to go ahead, click do it because, you know, it's a Friday afternoon. I'm not able to get a review before the weekend. Let's just get it done. So really the self-approval, self-submitted merge request is probably the #1 thing people are concerned about. Also, and this kind of ties back to some of what Hannah was talking about with roles, people are concerned if the role that they're given, whether that's developer, maintainer, or owner, allows them to turn off compliance controls, do something non-compliant, then re-enable it. We address that mostly today by trying to set enforcement at the group level. So you can say things like the author cannot commit their own merge request at the group level and then enforce that at the project. And that really helps to mitigate that concern of someone might be a project owner, but they're not a group owner. So they wouldn't be able to get around that control.
Great, thank you. If there aren't any more questions, let's pass it all over to Chaim.
Thank you, Reed. Thank you, Sam. Sharing my presentation. Hello, everyone. My name is Chaim Snur. I'm the product manager for Optimize. Similar to the other roadmap presentation, this is a disclaimer. Everything that we will share today, eventually, same as any other project might be, eventually have some scope change. So features, screenshot could change. Optimize as well is under the manage stage, and this is a very unique opportunities for a unique place for Optimize, as analytic is a need for anyone, and any step in the DevOps cycle have its own analytic needs. There are different subject matter expert for each one of the steps, and everyone wants to have its own kind of insight. But with Optimize, we are giving the overall perspective, overall insight end-to-end about the full life cycle and about the overall platform use cases. And this is what is special here. Insight that were captured from customers in the past year, and there is no news here. A leadership looking for a data or data decision supporting system. They want to find a single source of truth of what is happening right now with their teams, what is working, what not, and getting any insight that they can find from the data, finding opportunities to improve, finding risk detection, detecting risk if needed, and looking for best practices and across all the platform. And specific with Optimize, our objective is eventually to help organization recognize and demonstrate the value from their innovation. For the business executive, they want to get insight and understanding if the engineering team is serving the right business objective, as in the value stream is aligning to their goals. And the opposite side, for the engineering leadership, they want to have an option to demonstrate their value of the value that their team giving to the business, and to make sure they can easily report insight on that. And also, in addition to that, is looking deep into the day-to-day teamwork, finding best practices, finding a bottleneck and efficiency suggestion to improve the work. With Optimize, we have two categories: value stream management and DevOps report to serve those goals. Looking into the next year from a roadmap perspective, we are, for the short term, we are very focusing on completion of the DORA for metrics, the DORA, the marketing standard to measure DevOps performance. And so we are going to finish the fourth API change failure rate in 14.10, and we are starting planning and working on the UI to support to visualize eventually the metrics. And in addition to that, in the short term, we also want to add the ability of having the option of further investigation from the value stream. So once you are you are understanding the value or the performance of delivering a value to customers, and then when you want to get a further insight, how to investigate to find more insight to that. And also to we have a lot of small but very valuable usability suggestion to simplify and make the value stream analytic page much more engaged and intuitive for user. Looking a bit forward into the first half of the year, where we are also wants to make DORA as a foundation across both value stream management and the DevOps report. So we have a common language across all the analytics. And when we are measuring and we are looking for DevOps team performance in the DevOps report, we are also, you will have DORA metrics as a key measurements there. And by that, make it easy for both the team leaders, but also for executive to have this end-to-end understanding and end-to-end insight about the team performance. In addition to that, in order to improve the accuracy of the DORA metrics, we want to add integration into ServiceNow and Jira, especially around the measuring incident. This is very important for the change failure rate metric and the mean time to restore service. Those are key metrics to measure the stability of the deliveries by the teams, and getting those insights directly from ServiceNow and Jira will make it much more powerful. Also, we want to do a consolidation, centralization, focusing the GitLab analytics around the value stream management and DevOps report. We have several others report with Optimize, and we are investigating exactly what is working, what a bit not, and we might folding some of them and reorganize them in a way, in a workflow that will make it easier for user to use the product. In a bit specific, I had here a few examples. It might again screenshot and UX might change later on. So right now we already delivered these three APIs, the DORA metrics, and soon we will have also the fourth one, the change failure rate. And once we finish having the APIs, we start working on the UI. So first having a kind of a 4 tiles of the DORA, and later on having charge to give the overtime perspective to assist users to understand more insight about the past behavior of the metric. And also we will kind of highlight and give the business context of the DORA metrics in kind of thinking about how we are visualizing the team velocity and visualize the team stability. This is another thing that we are investigating. In addition to that, using DORA as a kind of bring everything together with the value stream analytic, with the DevOps report. So we have a similar metrics and a similar way of reporting across those reports. And again, by that, make it easy for user to understand the insight and to investigate for their needs. And these are examples for the integration about ServiceNow and Jira. So we also think about taking labels, for example, from Jira and have it into the value stream analytic, and by that making the development workflow align into the way that we report a value stream to be aligned into the development workflow. A few topics that we are going to validate. For us, it's very important to understand what are the top metrics that are the most important one for leadership. So we have this kind of single source of truth of having a dedicated or having in one page the most important metrics, both for leadership and both for engineering leaders, and eventually tie those metrics into decision-making process to make it easier for user to get the right data that they want. Also, we have investigate opportunity around adding traffic analytics and also to assist with the adoption of the DevOps adoption report. To increase the awareness, we are rethinking the tiering strategy around that. Last slide, there's some cross-group things that we want to consider. So the integration we talked about, we see a great synergy with the compliance to add into the DevOps adoption, also insight visibility into the compliance status. Of course, working with Workspace around the DORA metrics report and reviewing further options of adding the badge into kind of market standard about the team performance. And the last one is kind of to think about a solution to improve the report performance and having more analytic capabilities of thinking about collaboration, maybe around having a data warehouse for GitLab Analytics. This is another topic for a cross-stage opportunity. This is for Optimize, if there are any questions.
Yeah, Chaim, I had a question. Do we have plans to dog food value stream analytics internally?
Yeah, we have both. We are we are investigating the option with the QA engineering team to replace some of the Periscope dashboard, and we have opportunity over there. There is a gap. We did a gap analysis, and this is definitely a great opportunity for us, for the Optimize team, but also for GitLab to do dog fooding. Also, I can tell you that internally, just getting a kind of a single source of truth for the Optimize team to see the team velocity, the team stability. We are investigating also using the value stream analytic page for us as a starting point, and later on leverage this for the entire organization. Any more?
Great. Doesn't look like there are any more questions from the doc, so I'll go ahead and present for import. Okay, so in terms of import, we're already familiar with our famous slide, so I'm not going to repeat it. You can read it or you heard it before in the recording. So in terms of the channel specific to import, we have a Manage import channel for any questions or guidance that you need for import. The objective for import is building importers that our customer will find valuable, reliable, and easy to use, and removing any friction from migrating to GitLab and creating a more positive first impression when adopting GitLab. So this is really the first entry point for any user coming into GitLab. And as GitLab evolves, we want anyone around the world to be able to use this application and to contribute to it. So in terms of the categories that we have in the importer is importers, which is kind of self-explanatory, but it's either importing from another GitLab instance or from self-managed to SaaS or from another vendor to GitLab. And in terms of internationalization, that's the second category that the team is responsible for. And this is really about not only translation, but also other aspects of enjoying the product around the world. So this can be, first and foremost, translation of different strings into different languages. And today we have Spanish, Chinese, Russian, French, Japanese, Portuguese, German, and Korean as our primary targets for translations, but we have many more languages that the community usually contributes translations to, and once a month we pull that in from an external tool called Crowdin. But it's also about localization. So when you think about localization, it's also timestamps or date formats or other things that we're used to. So some languages are left to right and some are right to left. The whole interaction with a product can be different. So internationalization includes more than just translation. In terms of the supported importers here, this is the list of all the different different importers that we support. And you can see here that we support them on different levels. So the GitLab migration tool, which is usually used for migrating from self-managed to SaaS or from one place to another. For example, many of our users don't automatically upgrade to the latest version of GitLab. First, they want to do a testing environment, see that everything still works. And so they move it from one place to another, verify that everything's okay, and then they go ahead and upgrade their production environment. So this supports everything today besides designs, which is pretty new. So that's a gap. Similar to audit events, if this is something that people do not tend to when the feature is under development, usually it lags behind. And so it takes a while until we get around to supporting it. Group and project export, GitHub importer, which is also one of our major importers, and there are some gaps. We don't import epics, we don't import designs, and there are also some other fine-tuned nuances why sometimes that doesn't work. Bitbucket, GitEA, Git manifest CSV, Jira Fogsbugs, and Fabricator. You'll notice, for example, that Azure DevOps is not on the list, and others like Perforce and others that we do want to give the capabilities, but the demand isn't as high as you would expect. So we have not yet added the support to this. So what do we plan to work on this year? We really are focused on two different importers this year, and that's the GitLab to GitLab migration and the GitHub migration. But specifically, let's start with the GitLab migration. If you see here, I posted the popularity of our importers taken from this last month's data, and you can see that nearly 52% of our users are using the GitLab migration. So this is definitely the highest priority for the team. And coming in second is the GitHub importer with nearly 18% of our users. So what we want to do is really provide a world-class experience and delight the user by making this really seamless and just having everything work. And we recently shipped the ability to do GitLab group migrations, which was a really huge achievement for the team. and we're really excited about it. And this is supposed to replace our old importer. In terms of GitHub to GitLab migration, we want the ability to basically to TLDR it, create feature parity where everything you have on GitHub just automatically moves over into GitLab. Today, it isn't that seamless, and there is quite a lot of manual work that needs to be done in order to fill the gaps. So we want to work on making that experience much better. And lately, we've had lots of large organizations that are looking to move over from GitHub to GitLab, which is great. The challenge here is that they may have hundreds or thousands of projects and really large source codes, like over 20 gigabytes of storage that needs to move over. And our experience today isn't optimized for scalability. It works for small data sets, but once you are a bit larger, the experience is very, very clunky. So when we select repositories to migrate, there's really no really easy way to view a large number of them at the same time, or to select a subset of them and import them slowly. So the experience is not smooth. And we have a lot of concepts like organizations, teams, releases, and so on that are currently not included in the import. So you don't get a full experience when the import is complete. And sometimes if we don't have the ability to import these things over, it can be a deal breaker for a large organization, and they will just not move over to GitLab. So this is a real key focus and why it's important. In terms of what's next, so what we want to add now that we've added the group migration is the ability to migrate releases in terms of GitLab and additional assets inside the release. This is exciting for me because I previously came from release. And then designs, as we mentioned, these two are missing in terms of our full parity. So those two will complete the GitLab migration. And this is, I'm sure that you're all familiar, but this is what the designs look like, and we want to make sure that they move over to a new GitLab instance when you finish the migration. And in terms of the GitHub project, what we plan to do is, as I mentioned, reach parity, but what we want to do is import organizations to groups. We had to do this full mapping of how that maps out. Also, in terms of GitHub events, we had to figure out a mapping. Not everything is a one-to-one. So figuring that out was a bit challenging, but that's the main effort that we're going to do, these first two. And then snippets, releases, branches, and dashboards would be next. Planned research and validation. We plan to research the need for a TFS or Azure DevOps importer. We have lots of customers or prospects rather that are interested in it, and since we don't really support it, they don't necessarily continue on with talking to GitLab in terms of migrating over. So this is something that we want to understand the gap and capture. We do have a workaround, which is importing the CSV type of import. And those familiar with TFS, it's really easy to export to Excel and then save the CSV, but it's a manual and lengthy process. So we want to make that easier as well. And researching this will validate whether or not there's a business need for it. In terms of community contributions, we had also a few nice contributions lately. We had Bitbucket server contribution, some related to the export group, and we had quite a few around Fabricator and Importer, different small issues that kind of bucketed together to a really large community contribution. That's it. So I'll take questions now, if there are any.
Yeah, so I think I have the first one. Thanks for the presentation, Do we have any metrics on what languages people use the localization for most?
When you say localization, I assume you're talking about translation. Let me see if I can
Correct.
pull it up. We do. We gave a session and contribute in the summer all around this. So I'm gonna try to log into my Crowd-in and see if we can get the numbers from today. While I pull this up, why don't we go to the next question?
All right, that would be me. So from the customer side, who is the primary persona involved in the import process?
So it's usually going to be a technical sysadmin that does the initial migration over, maybe someone in IT, that they were tasked with migrating from one tool to another, or maybe they're responsible for the upgrade of the version. It's usually not going to be a developer that's working on a specific sprint of a feature, right? So similar persona to you.
Okay. I can go ahead with my next question too, if you're still looking.
Yep, go ahead.
All right, so you mentioned some customers have just not migrated to GitLab because of our scalability limitations. In these situations, is this something where like they've done the import, it fails and they're frustrated, or are we able to identify this ahead of time? And if so, what do we say?
Usually we're talking about large organizations, because as I mentioned, for a smaller subset of data, usually it works. The larger enterprise customers that are interacting with GitLab usually will use professional services in order to help them migrate over. So there's usually going to be a professional service opportunity that goes along with it. And the import team works really closely with the professional services team with every hiccup and escalation that we have. But for smaller customers that are not able to do it themselves, they just give up. They're not going to go for professional services, and they're not going to migrate over.
Okay, got it.
In the meantime, Sam, here we go. This is our statistics in terms of what we have already translated. So you can see like French is 97% translated, and Chinese we're doing pretty well. Hebrew is pretty poor. So those of you who speak Hebrew on the call, you can contribute to this. And so this is our active community. And you can see there's actually two numbers next to each flag. And the numbers represent two different things. One is community contributions where people suggest translations. And the other number is a maintainer. Think of a maintainer, of someone who approves the translation. And it's easier to contribute suggestions than it is to approve them, and that's why you see a large gap between the different numbers.
Got it.
I'll also
Okay.
add a
No,
link
that
to
helps.
this. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that that's really helpful. Do we have a way to see if someone turns on Hebrew in GitLab? Because then it'd be interesting to see how those two numbers correlate.
Since nothing has been approved, I would expect it to be 0.
Sure.
But it's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer is, so I'll need to come back and tell you. We can see different activity of people who suggest. You can see deletions, and you can see comments and suggestions, which is really interesting. And we have also reports to see like activity. So this month had a lot of approved words, and we went down in terms of translation suggestions. And you can see that sometimes we have spikes. For example, we had a spike last year for Norwegian. This person just like decided he was going to translate all of GitLab and just like rolled up his sleeves and went on a translation splurge. So it's interesting, and you can see the difference between translation and the proofreading. So the proofreading is much slower, much fewer people, but we do have excited community members who are active in this. It especially addresses to people who don't necessarily code, And this is a really great way for them to contribute to the product.
Awesome.
Well, great. I'm really surprised that we were able to keep on time. I thought that the 20 minutes per person wouldn't be enough, but I'm really proud of everyone. I want to thank everyone that presented today. I'm especially excited about the different validation efforts. It seems like every validation effort in the stage is very different. We have scorecards, we have terminology, we have business case, we have tiering. So I think it's really interesting to see very, very different efforts. I want to thank everyone who joined the call and whoever's watching the video. If there are any questions, you can reach us individually or in the stage Slack channel. And I'll post the recording.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.